Welcome to Decode. Today we're going to explore the beautiful topic of nostalgia, or why the past always feels better. Take a look around. The world isn't just moving, it's rushing. And whenever that happens, something really happens in our mind, which is we go back to the past. Not intentionally, but as if it's something within ourselves presses a rewind button. Nostalgia is not an old photograph or a book of childhood things. It's something happening right now inside your brain. The moment a smell or a song suddenly pulls you 10 years back. And here's the strange part. The brain does this on purpose. When you remember the past, it's not really playback. It's reconstruction. The brain is not an archive, it's more like a film director. Every time you revisit a memory, it edits the scene again. I learned this the hard way the day my wife gave birth. I was there the whole time with her holding her hand, and of course I saw pain I didn't think the human body would be able to endure. Hours of it. The kind of pain that makes you hold on to somebody's hand because there's nothing else that you can hold on to. And I remember thinking, no one goes through this twice voluntarily, so how do women have several children if they haven't to endure so much pain? You know, this has to leave a scar, this has to be something unforgettable, some sort of trauma. And so, months later, because I'm interested in these issues, I was talking to her, and when everything had settled, I asked her, how do you remember the day of, the birth, the labor, the pain? And you know what she said? She said, honestly, it wasn't that bad. And I stared at her speechless because I had been there and I knew exactly how bad it was. But her brain had done something extraordinary, something almost magic. It had kept the meaning of the moment, the illusion of giving birth, of seeing your child. All that was still there, but it had erased the suffering. Because if it didn't, again, humanity most likely would have collapsed millennia ago at one child per family. This is what psychologists call selective memory reconstruction. Your brain retrieves only what helps us survive in the present. So it's less, again, as I said, it's less like a memory, more like having a tiny archivist whispering to your ear, oh, here's your joy, here's your courage, here's the proof of how you survived before. And the older we get, of course, the stronger is our baggage of memories and this mechanism of nostalgia. So again, if memory is reconstruction, why does it always feel better than reality? Okay, so this is what we call the illusion of the golden age, and it's a very well-known studied phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that repeats itself everywhere you look, in every country, in every culture, in every generation. Everybody's convinced that the past, his past, or her past, is actually better. But that's not a reality. As I said before, this is psychology. When the present feels uncertain, too fast, too noisy, too pressured, the brain builds a bridge backward to a world that feels clearer and warmer. Not because that world existed, but because we need it to exist. Memory is not a mirror. Memory is an artist, as I said before. And that artist does not owe us the truth. Its job is to keep our mental health intact. Psychologists, they have a name for this. It's called the rosy retrospection effect. Basically, the brain automatically boosts the good and softens the bad in our memories. One of the clearest examples comes from music, and this is a really fun example. Researchers have found that everywhere you ask, everywhere you look, people of all ages, they believe that the best music ever made was the music made when they were 16, which is of course impossible, and it's for a psychological reason. It's not because that era was better, because of course each one of them is relating to a different era, but it's because at that age our brain is flooded with emotions of identity, of love, of rebellion. And so the music of that time becomes part of you. So it's not nostalgia for the songs, it's nostalgia for the moments, for the person that you were when you first heard those songs. And this does not only apply to music, it also applies with all the stories that we carry. There are memories from my early childhood that I remember with absolute clarity. I could tell you memories right now of, oh yeah, this is how it happened, this is how it went. Certain moments, certain scenes, I would swear they happened exactly as I recall them. But then when I have asked my mom, who was with me back then, she looks at me in a funny way and she says, Danny, it never happened like that. You're mixing things up, and in a more extreme case, you weren't even born when what you're describing really happened. And it's not because she forgot, because my mom has excellent memory. It's because my brain is actually filling the empty spaces and it's adding decoration and flourishes the way all brains do. So whenever we feel nostalgic, we're not going back to the past as it was. We're going back to the past as our brain has invented, because that's what it needs to be. But here's the danger. The brain does not just warm up the past. Sometimes it can actually overheat it. It's too smooth, it's too perfect. It's so perfect that any present today actually feels bad by comparison. And that's the reason why we say, oh, back then the world was better. Oh, when I was young. So nostalgia turns yesterday slowly into a myth, a perfect album that actually never really existed. And the myth is really powerful. It convinces us that we were closer to happiness, closer to life back then. But the more we believe in this golden age, as I was saying, the harder it becomes for us to build a new one. Let's see how nostalgia can become a medicine. Again, if nostalgia was just some sort of pretty illusion, it would have disappeared long ago if it was not useful for some reason. But it didn't. And it stays with us stubbornly, instinctively, because nostalgia is not decoration. It's useful. It's a form of mental medicine. Psychologists call nostalgia an emotional regulator. It's a system that activates whenever our inner world starts to wobble, to shake. And what does it regulate? Well, it regulates anxiety, tension, loneliness, and it gives us a certain sense of meaning. When you revisit a moment where you were truly okay, where you're feeling great, your brain reactivates the same neural pathways it used back then. So it gives you reward, it gives you a sense of bonding, it gives you a sense of safety. So again, nostalgia doesn't show you an image, it makes you feel that moment again. This is not poetry, this is actually neuroscience. Smell, especially, as I was saying before with my example of the beach, triggers what researchers have called the Proust effect. Some studies suggest that actually nostalgia can reduce the levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. Not dramatically, because again, nostalgia is not a pill, but enough to soften the body's stress response, enough to make us feel good. Because when you remember safety, your brain behaves as if you had returned to safety. And this mechanism is not individual. It appears in entire societies during collective crisis. I'm going to share a story that a friend of mine from Los Angeles actually told me. I don't know if this is a true story or if it's backed by science, but I think it's very interesting about the power of collective nostalgia. It brings us back to September 11. You will remember the attacks on the World Trade Center. And of course, everybody was under a huge state of stress and discomfort and basically despair, right? And this friend of mine, actually, he lives nearby Disneyland. And he reported that on the week after September 11, on the local newspapers, they said there were huge lines to actually enter Disneyland in Anaheim, California. And yeah, sure, maybe this is just his perception, something he witnessed. But from a psychological standpoint, now that we are talking about nostalgia, this makes perfect sense. Let me explain. People were terrified, overwhelmed. They were drowning in fear. And so their instinct was to run towards the safest symbol they had from childhood, a place where the world is under control, it's simple, where stories end well, and nothing truly bad can ever happen. That could be a church, but what about if it's the happiest place on earth? You know, a place that actually becomes an emotional bunker. And that's why you could see families actually going into Disneyland, because it made them feel safe. So let's now move on to the trap of nostalgia. Again, as I said in the previous section, nostalgia can heal, and it can be a very useful healing tool. But every medicine in a large enough quantity turns into poison. And that shift can become very quietly in the case of nostalgia. It's not with alarms, but it's with excess of comfort. It begins when the past stops becoming a story and it's more a reality that you decide to live in. What does this trap look like? Yeah, let me give you an example. It's very simple. It's the moment where you put on old music not because it moves you, but because nothing new can get you excited. It's the moment where you're starting to watch old TV shows not for the joy of them, but because trying something new feels like making a huge effort. You choose the familiar not because it's better, but because you're avoiding risk. And that's the trap. The past becomes slowly a cocoon, warm, predictable, pre-written, but a cocoon is not a home. That's where movement stops. And here's the problem with abusing nostalgia too much. The problem is you can't really feel things the way they were back then, not because the world got worse, but because you have changed, I have changed, we're not the same person. So when we try to resurrect emotions from another era of our life, we inevitably resent the present because we're going to feel like, oh, why doesn't it feel like before? But most of the time, it's not that the world got smaller or more dangerous or worse. No, it's just us. And of course, when we bring up those memories, we cannot be that guy. We are this guy. And here's the science behind that idea of the prison that I want to share with you. Again, as I said in the previous section, nostalgia can heal, and part of the reason why it heals it can lower our stress, our cortisol levels. It calms stress, it stabilizes our identity, as we will see later in another section. And again, our brain loves the past because it already knows all the answers, all the outcomes, and that is safe. But the present and the future run on a whole different set of neurotransmitters. One of them is the classic dopamine that I have been talked about in many other videos. That's the molecule of curiosity, of novelty, of risk, of innovation. So too much nostalgia for too long, sure, it will keep your cortisol low, but it will also keep your dopamine levels low. And you will stop exploring, stop inventing, stop imagining. Psychologists, they have a name for this, which is reduced openness to change. And that's a well-known side effect of excessive nostalgia, for example, in older people. And that's why the balance matters. Sure, we do need our past to anchor us and to heal us whenever we need it, but we need the future to move us. We need nostalgia for safety, but we need novelty for growth. If we were an animal, we need to have legs, but we need to have wings. Memory and motion, cortisol and dopamine in kind of like a tango, in a dance of balance. So sure, the past feels safe, but life only expands when we step back from the past and you move into the future. I want to talk now about why specifically nostalgia feels safe. And to understand why nostalgia feels so comforting, so relaxing, we need to start with one brutal truth, which is the human brain treats uncertainty as a threat. Imagine you're in Africa, 100,000 years ago, and you live by a river. And the river is a calm place and you have access to, fresh water, and maybe there's trees there where you can actually hide if an animal comes. This is a predictable environment. And again, why would you move away from there even if they tell you, oh, there's more food on this other side of the jungle? You will not, because where you are good. You see, the brain from an evolutionary standpoint has been trained to embrace predictability, because predictable means safe and it means survival. And of course, what is the most predictable place in our entire life? The past. That's the idea. That's how it works. The brain prefers the familiar, even when the familiar wasn't perfect, because as I said before, our brain is going to make it perfect by selective reconstruction. So in evolutionary terms, familiarity is what kept you alive. If you ate a berry, and this example I was saying about Africa, right? Imagine you eat a berry and you don't die. You learn that berry is healthy and you eat it again and you have a source of food. And imagine in that same scene I was saying about the river in Africa, there's a cave, and you sleep in a cave and you know what, it's warm and it's cozy and you survive. that cave becomes a shelter, and with time it becomes home. You see? And so many thousands of years coming now to the present, this instinct, it's still running in the background of our minds, this instinct to choose the familiar. We have explored so far many angles of nostalgia, the way it works, why it makes us feel safe, how it can make us heal, and how it can become poison. But I want to talk now about one final angle, which is very interesting, which is the nostalgia as a mirror for identity, about the way we build ourselves by looking at who we were. When life becomes heavy, we don't just lose control of our schedule or of our stress. We lose our sense of self. There's a term in psychology for this, which is called the idea of the possible selves. This is this idea that we look back at everybody else that we could have become if we had made different choices in our lives. And whenever we feel stressed, we tend to go back and pull those other Dannies as basically way out of the situation of stress. So it's not like those were better. It's more that, as I said before, we have made these ones beautiful by this phenomenon of selective memory reconstruction. And sometimes we miss those guys, but we miss the ideal version of those guys. But the reality is that sometimes actually using nostalgia, it can help us restore our narrative of ourselves. And here's the cool twist about this, about identity. Nostalgia is actually a window to your potential, showing you who you were. It shows you who you can become. It's a mirror that looks back, but then once you turn the mirror around, it turns to the future. Because remember this, it's showing us an ideal version of ourselves. This version is not true because it's really nostalgia, but this version can actually become useful. So really, the real question that you need to find the answer for is that simple. Nostalgia is presenting us a perfect version of the past. As I said, because of memory reconstruction, what we see is an ideal version of who we were. Okay, why don't you take that ideal version of who you were and try to make it the real version of you in your future? So I'm going to finish this video with, of course, some conclusions. As you've seen, nostalgia is not the enemy. It's not trying to pull you back. It's trying to tell you something really, really simple, which is the past is actually now part of your mental arsenal, your battle chest. Sometimes you can use this past as a tool to lower our sense of stress when times become tough. Sometimes we can use it to build a better tomorrow. Sometimes we can use it to refine who we are, our identity. But we cannot become too trapped inside of it because, again, too much nostalgia kills progress, kills change, kills innovation. But I want to end up this trick with a very cool nostalgia trick that I think you guys are going to love. Remember this, every day we enjoy our own nostalgia, but every day somebody else, somebody younger who most likely lives in your house and it's around you, is building up his or her own memories, her own nostalgia. And you know what? Inside that future nostalgia is you. That boy, that girl, he will look back at these days now and he will call them the good old days when he was with you. So somebody one day will miss your laughter. He will miss these late night conversations. He will miss the walks to the neighborhood, the way you told him how to do math, the way you taught him how to swim. We consume memories, but we are memories too. Today, we're building the future nostalgia of someone else, someone we care about. And so the best gift we can give them is to make sure we are worth it, that we become a good memory. So before this video ends, I want you to ask yourself, what moment from today can you build so that the future for them becomes a good memory?